And good luck. Now, these are, what did I measure here? Non-farm business sector real output per hour. Why did I pick that? Because it covered the entire time period. And so I was, okay, I'll use that. Surely it's somewhat derivative of what else is going on. Now, we are going to do going back to changes, all right? Like we did for the monetary one. And let's see, I shouldn't say anything else. I should ask you. All right, so if unemployment is going to fall from early to mid to late, would you expect to have seen labor productivity to rise or fall? Let me go back to the theory. Okay, there's the theory. Unemployment is going to fall from early to mid to late. Would you therefore assume that the demand curve for labor had shifted right or left?
For an increase in unemployment?
Increase in employment. A decrease in unemployment, because we've gone from early to mid to late. Unemployment goes down, therefore employment goes up.
It's just right.
It's just right. So therefore, what does productivity do? Go up or down? That's right.
That's right.
Has to go up. That's right. Yeah. So that what we should expect then is from early to mid for productivity to rise. I'm sorry, early to mid to late for productivity to rise, and then late to recession for productivity to fall. Check it out. We once again half credit to the school of thought for making either one of the two connections within that particular cycle. And let's see. Oh, this is my answer.
So you have in here is changes in productivity year over year?
No, I have overall productivity. Oh, yes, that's right. I have the rate of growth of productivity in the first part, and then I have the rate of growth of productivity in late. And there's also a couple of problems with that I'm going to bring up here in just a second. But so these are rates of growth of productivity. And so the rate of growth of productivity declines over the course of the expansion here in Ike 1, and then it suddenly increases going into the recession. I don't have productivity per se.
So Jeff, in Ike 1, the late is 1.88. Does that mean in that year the productivity growth was 1.88, or is that a change from the earliest period?
It is the, well, luckily late is always 1 year. Right, so all of these are exactly 1 year, and it is the average annualized quarterly change. If you see what I'm saying. Well, actually, here's the data.
I just want to make sure I understood what that number is.
Yeah, and here's the problem with the other columns, though. This is a much longer period of time, generally speaking. Well, look, this one's 39 quarters, so the 35 of those are. Oh, somebody wanting to use the lab? 35 of those are all averaged in there, and I didn't do any weighting or anything. And let's see. Now I'm going to use a 6-sided die that I will divide by 2. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's right. 4. That means Alex. I think that's what I got. Oh, no, wait. I got 3.5. Let's see. But I could have screwed it up. There's what I got. Should have gone up, but it went down. Should have gone down, but it went up. It does work for the second linkage on the second one. Not at all there. 1/2. Am I right? This should have gone down, but it went up. That should have gone up, but it went down. Here, should have gone up, should have gone down. Perfect. Should have gone up, should have gone down. Should have gone up, should have gone down. Yeah. So I got 3.5 out of 8. I'm really not confident about these data. All right. I wanted to have you go through the process of practicing it and thinking, how would I translate that into, if these were productivity data that were reliable, what would you do? Okay, you would do this. But also, as I said, their school of thought believes this has a very long-run impact, these changes, so that it may be that a change in labor productivity here in, late Ike 1 actually is still having reverberations throughout the economy that we have to take into account by the early part of Vietnam or something like that. I didn't let it do that. Also, if you've got more people employed, then everything else being equal, is the marginal product of labor going to be higher or lower?
Lower.
Yeah. So I don't think ultimately that's a problem with this, but there's also the fact that, well, yeah, but at higher, okay, when productivity goes up, that's going to raise the wage rate and cause more people to come to work, but it's also going to cause people to come to work that have lower average rates of labor productivity. The former should offset the latter, according to the very simple graph we've got. In fact, here, look at it this way. So here's our current labor demand curve and our current labor supply curve, and the labor demand curve is also a marginal product of labor curve. Oops. And so then we have higher productivity, and we're going to be up here. To have a lower, we're going to have more people employed, so had we stayed on the same curve, we'd have been at a lower point of marginal productivity, but we're at a higher point on a curve further to the right. I don't know. I was playing around with it last night, and I don't think that's the problem with why this doesn't work well. It's also not very popular, by the way, so that could be another reason that it doesn't work well, is that maybe it's just not very good. But I'm especially weak on the data with this one. All right, what time is it? I have no idea.
11:43.
Cool. We have a half an hour left. Now, there's one more exogenous theory, and that's all I'm asking you to know for this test, is just the how to test the exogenous ones. But let me do one of the endogenous ones first, because it's just to show you how it would work a little differently, and plus it'll save us from getting to the really complicated one just yet. I may end up saving that one till next time, but we'll see how far we get on this one. But let's do Keynes, all right? Now, if we just had this one, so you haven't studied for an exam for it yet, but well, let's see if you can remember. Now, Keynes is going to be particularly concerned about the shift from early to mid to late, because he's going to say that what's happening is not an exogenous shock or the effect of the government policy, it's actually endogenous. Factors that are taking place within the private sector are causing the recession. And so, if you want to call this late and early to mid, what's one of the important things happening up here? Do you remember?
Capital investment falls.
Investment falls, that's right. And what else? That's one of the things we're going to look for. Does investment slow down in late relative to early to mid? At the same time that it's slowing down, you guys are all entrepreneurs, okay? And you're finishing projects, and so you're stopping investing, and you're starting to open up the doors of your restaurants and so forth. What are you expecting?
I'm expecting profits.
You're expecting, yeah. You're expecting to do really well. Except that the problem is that investment has fallen. So in fact, I see high expected profits, and we'll say average actual profits, all right? So that it's this contrast here. Now you got to include all three, because, let me get another pen. The line of causation is this. And I told you I'd show you that specifically when we got to Koleski, but the falling investment is leading to moderating profits. Not necessarily bad profits, but moderating profits. But the problem is you expected better, all right? And so the contrast between those two, panic, and then the error of optimism is replaced by an error of pessimism, and you go down the other way. So he's figuring all this happens between here and here. So he's going to be looking for a fall in investment, or at least a deceleration of investment, if not an outright fall. at least a deceleration in profits, if not an outright fall, and for expectations to still be expecting things to get better. Now, do you remember what I used for that? You guys actually started to look it up when we were talking about it.
Oh, the PMI.
That's right, the PMI. Yeah, the Purchasing Managers Index. That's going to be our measure of expectations here. And if the PMI is greater than 50, I've actually written it wrong on the sheet I looked a little while ago. I have greater than or equal to, but it should just be greater. If it's greater than 50, then entrepreneurs were expecting things to get better. Meanwhile, the question is, were profits still increasing at the same rate or faster or whatever, and what was investment doing? And I have all those data right here. Keynesian. What did I do with Keynes? Uh-oh. Don't tell me it didn't print. I printed these out at my house last night, which means, now there they are right there. I didn't actually double check to make sure that this morning when I was double checking, a bunch of pages were blank. I was like, well, crap, I didn't print those off. But it just fed blank pages through the printer. Good luck. So this has got all three of those important variables on here. We don't really care what it says in recession, all right? And good luck.
So the expectation is the PMI,
Correct.
and the profits are measured how?
Those are rates of increase in, and in fact, I believe I have, I try to be careful about that. Down here at the bottom, in the smaller print, that's real gross domestic investment. Well, I have deflated, it's already deflated. Annualized rate of change. The profits are corporate profits after taxes with inventory evaluated, annualized rate of change, and that's just the Purchasing Managers Index. So those are only corporate profits after tax. So it's a rate of change of corporate profit. Annualized rate of change. And so what Keynes is saying is that first of all, and I'm sorry, when I was putting all these things together, they started to get so complicated. This is the first one we've had that has more than one number on it. The key is down here at the bottom. Investment is first, profits are second, PMI is third. All right, so I didn't put that on every one because that just was running out of space. So in early to mid Ike, investment rose at 14.27% in annualized terms on average. In the last year of Ike 1, investment actually fell. All right. And in this recession, again, we don't really, this is the question of what triggered the recession. I'm sorry, I should have backed up to my earlier question, shouldn't I? Because this is the first time where we've had one that, what variable are we trying to explain? Well, this time it's not unemployment. This time it's rate of GDP growth, right? Now, obviously we're going to assume there's going to be a correlation, but he's really after rate of GDP growth. And so the first one for investment, you're like, okay, that worked. What about for profits? Profits increased at 16.51% in annual terms up through mid-expansion. They didn't fall, but they decelerated very rapidly. However, notice that entrepreneurs weren't expecting things to get better in this last one. All right, so the investment part works, the profit part works, but the expectations don't on this one, all right? Now, again, if we make a more sophisticated test, maybe we would say, yeah, but 49.68 would still have been better than what they got, but we don't have that. So we're just doing a real simple test, and it works for, let's see, how did I do the scoring on this one?
You make it 2 by 6.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember what I did now. I'll have to see. I did it a lot simpler than that. Oh, look, I just did yes, yes, no. Yes, 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 that sort of thing. So I just did each individual variable by itself. Remember, why don't I have 1/2 anymore? We're only checking one thing. We're only checking from early to mid to late. So this will take a little longer, all right? But go ahead and check it out. And just pick, I don't know, maybe the easiest thing to do would be pick one variable at a time. Go through and check all the investment ones. Does investment decelerate or even become negative rates of change from early to mid to late? And we'll just look at that first, okay? We'll just do one at a time. Now, on the exam, I would expect you to be able to do that
Expect
test.
declining investment in their actual recession, so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly, yeah, so we don't even bother, although the Volcker one, but of course that's a really weird one because it's so short. But yeah, all of them, the investment simply collapses in the recession. But we're not giving him any credit for that one because the MBER determined that was a recession, and one of the variables they used to determine that was the collapse in GDP, which was caused by the collapse in investment. So that's kind of cheating.
It's not what they want, though, right?
Yeah. And I think, if I'm looking back here, it works every time but one. Yeah. And Vietnam, by the way, I remember I was telling you on Tuesday was one of the times when the index of leading indicators didn't work. It predicted a recession that didn't happen because there was some spending for the Vietnam War that wasn't mentioned out loud. So there's some strange phenomenon for that one. But hey, it didn't pass, all right? So you can't sort of say, oh, well, I have an excuse for that one. No, I mean, if we're going to set the test up, either it passed or it didn't. The profits, as I recall, work even better. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, let's see, 1, 2, 3 times they were still increasing, but the rate of increase had dropped considerably. It's less than a fourth in Ike 2. It's about a fifth in Oil Shock 1. And it's about half in this Desert Storm one. But actually the others' profits were actually falling. Now, but what were people expecting? And for this one, you only need to look at the one number in this cell right here. Is it greater than 50? And man, look at Oil Shock 1. Remember when we were saying in class on Tuesday that in a lot of ways, really there wasn't any reason to expect a recession yet. But once they almost tripled oil prices, and so people were really very optimistic going into what turned out to be a really bad period. The only screw up here is Desert Storm and late. So what have I got here for my summary statistics? Let's see here. So I got, yeah, that one working out 7 out of 8, that one working out 8 out of 8, and that working out 6 out of 8. Okay, but you also know which one I think makes sense, right? So I tend to have organized the data in a way that would help me visualize this specific thing. So you also have to bear that in mind with testing of various economic concepts, that the perspective from which the tester comes makes a difference. Even in the natural sciences, they have problems with bias. People tend to set up experiments in ways that are going to show what they expect to show, when of course they would. You're trying to make sure you measure what you expect to have happen. And so I set this whole thing up with this in mind, with me thinking this is the one that makes the most sense. So I forced the others into a format that really initially came from this one right here. So perhaps it's not surprising that it did the best, because after all, I already had a preconception that it would be, and I even set up the test in a way that would, not that would bias it towards these results, but that would, if they were there, would bring them out. But then of course that might screw up the other tests if they're not thinking the way the world works the same way. All right, now you don't have to know this one for the exam. Okay, that's for the final. Even though we have covered that theory, I'm trying to break up what things you have to learn from test to test. All right, this next one. This is really kind of interesting, but it's such a messy problem. This is the neoclassical Keynesian. And we didn't really, well, A, this was exam 1, and B, we didn't really talk about it in these terms so much. It was spread out over several study questions. Let me show you here and remind you what we did. Here is there's your neoclassical Keynesian labor market where there's a downward rigidity of some sort, all right? So unemployment ends up fluctuating because of shifts in the demand curve. And what's going to shift the demand curve? Primarily monetary and fiscal policy. And that was covered in that question on stop-go stuff, but I never really integrated it with that. So let me just tell you here. Fiscal or monetary stimulus is going to do what to that demand curve that I took off the page now? Shift it right or left? Yeah. Increase the demand for labor and presumably increase employment. And then vice versa. So our question is going to be, How do we measure those two things, all right? So we're trying to figure out unemployment. And the question is, how am I going to measure a monetary and a fiscal policy stance? And let's do the easy one first, all right? What do you want? What is it?
Professor, I'm dying. I'm not trying to distract you.
Oh, good luck.
No,
Yeah, that's right.
dying from not actually physically dying. But,
We all are, though, actually.
no. When you're growing.
Oh, that's true, that's true. But yeah, because you can go into the doctor, am I dying? Well, yes, of course, all of us are. So the
I don't remember all that.
monetary stimulus here, let's see. Okay, if the Fed, after the financial crisis, the Fed was hoping to stimulate the macroeconomy, what did they do? What was the primary tool they used? And what do they, well, I'll shut up, John, shut up. I mean, they used a lot of tools after that because a lot of things didn't go the way they expected to, but what's one thing for sure? They moved. After the financial crisis, things suck. And so,
His most recent one.
yeah, drop the interest rate. That's right. So let's just use the interest rate, all right?
Zero.
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to use the change in the interest rate here. And we're going to expect to shift the demand curve to the right. Are you raising or lowering the interest rate? Lower. Yeah, that's right. So fall in the interest rate is going to be stimulative, and a rise in the interest rate is going to be contractionary. Okay. Here comes the problem. What do you want to use for this? Let me get my eraser.
We're going to use the year-over-year increase in the fiscal budget, fiscal government spending.
So you want government spending?
For fiscal stimulus?
Yeah. Anything else? What's the other major tool of fiscal policy?
Quantitative easing movement.
Now that'll be back over there.
Taxes.
Taxes.
They're talking about now.
The net difference, all right? Okay, here's something that hasn't really come up with the other variables. And let me show you the data first. Let me go ahead and show you these so you can see it's really going to show up what I'm talking about here. Here's the data for the Keynesian one. Those interest rates, I believe, are deflated is what I did. Yeah, only I used the CPI at the exact same time rather than an expected one, but yeah. But this one ends up being a real pain in the neck. And I can tell you that right back to my dissertation when I was having to include something about fiscal policy on my dissertation. Okay, let me give you this example. Over the course of the 1990s, all right, the top button, top value there on each of those is going to be the net government budget balance, all right? So that's going to be G minus T. I'm sorry, it's going to be, it's the deficit, so it's going to be T minus G then, isn't it? Yeah, because I've got it measured as how much in deficit did they spend. So if it's negative, it's a stimulus. If it's positive, then it's contractionary, all right? So that's the size of the deficit. That's how much more we spent above and beyond how much we taxed, which of course is going to be measured that way. So negative is going to be expansionary, and positive is going to be contractionary. But here's the problem. Okay, let me find this period right here. Yeah. Look at the longest peacetime expansion in history. Which cycle is that going to be?
Vietnam?
Was, until this one happened.
Oh, yeah.
September 11th one, yeah, which is going to include the 1990s right in here, right? So we've got 39-quarter expansion.
How many quarters are we at right now?
I don't know, but it's getting pretty long. Yeah, which is somewhat concerning.
We're looking at 9-ish years on that one, and this current one we're looking at
Since halfway through 2009?
that one 2009. That's
We're getting
What?
close. Another year.
And so halfway through 2018 would be 9 years, right? So yeah, so I mean, it's getting pretty close.
That one
Yeah.
was like
Sell.
an awesome expansion though, right? That-
Actually-
This one's kind of sucked.
Actually, it was better than this one, but actually it wasn't that strong. I mean, relatively speaking. I mean, well, relative to earlier rates of investment in GDP growth, it wasn't as strong. Now, of course, we would trade places with it without question. But look what happens here to the government budget over the course of that. And remember, this school of thought is going to say that a negative number is stimulative, a positive number is contractionary. But there's a lot more going on here than just that. And over the course of that expansion, oh, that doesn't move. Over the course of the expansion, so you've got, over time here, if that's a long expansion, what are tax revenues going to tend to do over the course of an expansion? That's right. Let me use green for tax revenue. I'm sorry, red for tax revenue and green for government spending. So we're going to have tax revenue doing something like this. What's government spending going to do, everything else being equal?
I would say increase as well.
And stay the same.
If everything else is equal, because that's fiscal policy.
Well, let's
They
say,
have to decide that they're going to spend more.
right, so let's keep discretionary fiscal policy the same. And however, more people have jobs, people have higher incomes, so what are we not paying as much of out of government spending? And I'm including state and local here as well. Yeah, unemployment and welfare. So we've got like that. So over the course of this big long expansion, this is going up, up, up. This is going down, down, down. And you know, and you see Republicans and Democrats hurt themselves by patting themselves on the back for, look how we balanced the budget. You had the longest peacetime expansion in history, right? So it was not like you started off in the Great Depression and did this. I mean, this was already trending up. This was already trending down. Now, did they make some decisions at the end to try to make them cross? They did, because they wanted to make them cross. All right, but generally speaking, this wasn't a choice. This is what was a result from automatic stabilizers built into spending. The economy tends to automatically go into this direction when it's contracting. Tax revenues go down. Why? Because people don't have jobs, and people don't have as high an income in their jobs. Meanwhile, government spending goes up because now we're paying for unemployment and welfare and so forth. So that, well, wait a minute now, that means that when the economy's not doing well, we're going to tend to get a negative number. But they're saying that negative numbers should stimulate the economy. And the problem is that there is a part of the budget that is discretionary and part of the budget that's automatic. So you can't just look at the raw number and decide, aha, if they went into deficit, then that must have been stimulative. It could be that they went into deficit because they went into a recession, that the recession caused a deficit, and so the deficit may have caused the recession not to become as bad because it created a sort of a bottom floor to incomes and it cut taxes. But that particular part of the deficit that was created by the automatic stabilizers isn't the, oh gosh, what's the name of it? I have to look in my macro class. Let's see, laptop. Whatever the name of the expansion was, of the fiscal stimulus. John Harvey.
It's 20-9 one.
Yeah. Where's intermediate macro? There it is. Study questions. Yeah, it has a name. It is right here, like one of the last questions. There it is. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. All right? Now that's discretionary. They voted to spend some extra money, okay? So that is a different kind of deficit than the kind that is created by the recession. There's a kind of deficit that's created by the recession. There's a kind of deficit that's created to get us out of the recession, all right? And I don't know. I've tried different analogies over the years. If your restaurant that you run, you have a deficit this year, could be because sales sucked, or it could be because you added on a new part of your restaurant. all right? Adding on a new kind of the restaurant is a very different kind of deficit, a very different kind than you would have that resulted from the fact that we didn't have many sales this year. And so that deficit resulted from the lack of economic activity. The other deficit is an anticipation of creating more economic activity. So this is the problem that gets created with this number here. As an economist, using this fiscal stimulus data, you have to try to figure out, how can I separate these out? And fortunately for me, when I was writing my dissertation, I found a data set that had already done that, all right? So I have searched and searched and searched in this class over the course of the last decade, because my problem is I needed to stretch back to 1954. And what you really need is a formula that represents how much the automatic part is responsible for. You'll see estimates all the time.
That sounds like a lot of work, or is that actually you build the formula and then you can run it through a spreadsheet?
You could. I mean, it ends up being, yeah, but they didn't do it that way in 1973, you know, and so.
Like abacuses and
Yeah, and you know, the CBO will calculate stuff like that, but I need a quarterly data set. So I gave up this year. I surrendered. These are just the raw numbers. I made no attempt whatsoever to separate out the automatic and the discretionary part. So you look at September 11th, you think, whoa, this theory doesn't work at all. Because look at this, this is the longest peacetime expansion in history. And yet the government budget went way into surplus. That's exactly the opposite of what the Keynesians would argue would happen. And so I ended up calculating, and then of course, so we should expect this to become a bigger negative number here and a bigger positive number here, or you know, less negative. And it doesn't work that way. In fact, let's see, what do you end up getting? Now blocked off with my notes. There they are. It doesn't work very well. I think possibly to the tune of 0, which is really, really not well. Here it is. Yes, 0. And so the first time, and then the interest rate stuff. Oops, I'm sorry. You should expect interest rates, and these are minus CPI. You should expect interest rates to be going down as the economy expands, and then going up because that's where the economy is not doing well. Well, okay, so I went through and did it that way, right? And I ended up with 0 out of 8 and 1.5 out of 8. And I thought, you know what, that's not really fair. If I were a neoclassical Keynesian economist, what would I be thinking? And so I introduced here, so there's 2 ways to test this one that you have on your little summary sheet. And this was, well, let's just do a lag, all right? Let's say that, let's see, oh, I'm sorry, let me look at my exact test here. Look at that footnote right there. And again, this is available on your webpage. One could make the assumption that the impact of both policies is lagged, such that rising interest rates and government budget in late expansion cause the recession that follows. We would then expect the early to mid numbers to be less than the late, and this is shown after the slashes. It works every single time for the